Still, I'd have to repeat them out because later on people can't read them. So we have a question here from a viewer. Says, I've been married for 18 years and we have 2 wonderful teenagers. Our marriage has been heading toward disaster for 16 of those years due to all the getting and protecting behaviors you talk about in Real Love. I discover my husband has had at least, I assume you mean 1 emotional affair for 6 months, several daily phone calls, daily visiting her family home. He insists that he did not have sex with the woman, although there is some circumstantial evidence that he may have. But he says that she is the type of person that he would consider marrying, which is, and she writes, parenthesis, ouch. 2 months ago, the woman moved to another town, and a mutual friend brought us together to mediate. The result is that we're talking again for the first time in 16 years, and we're working hard, and it's getting better every day. But I keep coming. So I'm going to need some clarifications. You keep coming to what? And are the 2 of you using any part of the Real Love principles together? While she's typing an answer to that, I want to describe just a little bit about affairs. We tend to take affairs personally. We make them about us. So your husband goes out and has an affair with a woman, and you tend to take that personally, which is understandable. I mean, it seems to be quite a slight on your marriage, but it's really not about you. Like you said, for 16 years you've been exchanging getting and protecting behaviors because you've both been empty. He's painfully empty and afraid. And so he found somebody who, for a brief period of time, gives him a new source of imitation love. And that feels great. Falling in love is the greatest thing because it gives us a greater supply of imitation love than we've ever known. And the feeling is wonderful. The problem is it doesn't last. It didn't last in your marriage. You fell in love in the first place because of a great, enormous exchange of imitation love. And now that it's worn off, well, it wore off pretty soon. Like you said, you've been married for 18 years. And 16 of it has been living in hell. So imitation love rarely lasts for very long. And then when it wears off, you're left with disappointment, bitterness, frustration. You're left pointing fingers at each other. Well, you once made me happy. You promised to make me happy. It's enormously frustrating. And he has become more and more distant from you, and he found a new source of imitation love. Well, duh, he gravitated to the source. And she says here, I keep coming back to the fact that his intuition tells me, oh, you keep coming to your own intuition, that he's not telling the whole truth about the affair. I feel like I need to know the truth to move on, while he says he needs me to stop bringing it up for him to move on. I see an incredible opportunity to transform our lives together. Why can't I let go of this? Or should I? And if so, how do I do it? But I keep coming back to the fact that I believe that he's not telling me the whole truth about the affair. I feel like I need to know the truth to move on, while he says he needs me to stop bringing it up for me to move on. Okay, so what's holding you back is that you feel like you need to hear the whole truth. You need to, in some way, have the scales of justice balance, and you need to hear the whole thing. And you don't. Unconditional love means loving somebody no matter what. Whether they're lying, whether they're making mistakes. You've got to remember that he had the affair in the first place because he doesn't feel loved. He doesn't feel loved by anybody. Didn't feel loved by his parents when he was a little kid. Doesn't feel loved by you now. And so he's now in a position where he's going to try to recreate this marriage with you or reconcile with you, and you're coming at him and saying, okay, now I want you to tell me the details about this affair. Remember, he's empty and afraid. the odds that he's going to be able to tell you the truth without lying are teeny. So it's actually probably likely that he's had a sexual affair with this woman. And it really doesn't make any difference. Really, it doesn't. An emotional affair, a sexual affair, whether he'd had an affair with his job, whether he'd been using drugs, they were all just the ways that he could cope with drowning. So if you're going to take advantage of this opportunity for your marriage to succeed, you really do need to let it go. You need to see him as drowning. Now you ask the question, how do I let it go? Two ways. First, you've got to see that a drowning person does whatever it takes to keep their head above water. Have an affair, lie. If he has had a sexual affair at this point, he would be too afraid to talk to you about it. It's just the way it is. So leave him alone and tell him, you know, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. What's the difference? He was unfaithful, period. Who cares how? And my goal now, instead of extracting the truth from you or punishing you or insisting on justice or anything else, my goal is to love you better. That's all that matters to me. I think you're going to see quite a difference if you do that, especially if the two of you sit down and work through the book, Real Love and Marriage, together. It will encourage the two of you to be more and more truthful with each other. And if you genuinely show unconditional love toward him on a consistent basis over a long period of time, it's very likely that at some point he'll tell you the entire truth, at which point you won't care. You see? But to pound him now to tell you, you're just going to frighten him more and make this opportunity you have to make a great marriage, you're going to make it impossible. You'll ruin it. So I suggest you don't do that. Same lady. She says, I was invited to a few small get-togethers with friends over the holidays. I asked my sister if I could attend also, and my friend said yes. During the first gathering, I felt like my sister dominated the conversation in an aggressive way. Afterward, I asked her if she could try to be more sensitive in sharing the conversation. She blew up and said I was trying to control her. Was it inappropriate to try to talk with her about sharing the conversation? Is that being controlling? Or should I just not invite her to the subsequent gatherings? This is a great question. It was completely inappropriate for you to ask your sister to change the way she talks, because you're asking her to change who she is. Your sister dominates conversations because she gets a feeling of praise for knowing a lot, for being witty and whatever she does in her conversations, and she gets a feeling of power. She uses praise and power to keep herself from drowning, to fill up her emptiness with imitation love. And you come along and you say, now, I know you're in a lot of pain, I know you're drowning, but I don't want you to fill yourself up with imitation love. There's no way in the world she could hear you. None. You can't ask a drowning person. It would be exactly like you coming up to a drowning person who is splashing and saying, could you do that with just one hand? Because it would be less bothersome to me. There's no way she can hear you. She would hear it as an attack. She can't stop what she's doing. It's who she is. And then she's going to feel offended and attack you back and tell you that you're controlling, which you were. You have to let people be who they are. And if you can love her while she's doing that, cool. If you're at a place in your life where you're not yet capable of loving her while she's doing that, then don't invite her to the next gathering. And then as you become more loving over time, which you will, then eventually you'll be able to invite her to a gathering, watch her dominate the conversation, and just let it go. See what I'm saying? I'm not telling you you have to love her while she's doing that right now. That'd be just as impossible for you as it is for her to stop dominating a conversation. Here's a viewer who has said, how do you feel about Saddam Hussein's execution? I'm of the opinion that pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, everybody who does something wrong, everybody who is hateful, everybody who hurts other people does so because they lack true love in their lives. I've read many hundreds of pages now of biographies about Saddam Hussein. He was raised in an environment and in a time and was put in places where it would have been very difficult for him to grow up and be a loving human being. He was abused terribly by his father, then stepfather, raised in gangs, raised to be a thug, horribly disadvantaged, essentially trained to be the kind of person that he was. Now, does this absolve him of responsibility? No, it doesn't. So my inclination is that most people can be helped by simply loving them. Some people, however, become so enmeshed in their emptiness and fear. And boy, if you watched his trial at all, this was one horribly frightened and empty man. His whole life became about the acquisition of greater praise and power. And only when somebody is empty and afraid are they that concerned with those things. His life paralleled that of Hitler's in more ways than I can begin to tell you. And he got to the place where he was so consumed with imitation love and with getting protecting behaviors, with power, with hurting other people, that he became absolutely unreachable. Nobody could talk to him about anything. If anybody disagreed with him, they killed him. And he killed tens of thousands of people. We really kind of don't even have a clue how many people he killed. At some point, when somebody becomes unhelpable, they have to live with the consequences of what they've done. And other people have to be protected. So how do I feel about him being executed? I think it was the right thing to do. I think it was the right thing to do to protect the lives of many other people who could have been subsequently hurt had he stayed alive and perhaps fomented additional rebellion and caused additional deaths. I think where we make a mistake is that when someone receives their consequences, we make a huge mistake when we delight in them. When we say, well, he got his. Well, he deserved that. When we get angry in return, there's really an energy to love. There's a feeling to it. It causes miracles. It changes people's lives. But so does anger and so does hate. And we don't need to be adding to the hate in the world. And when we hate those who have hurt us, we often cause more problems than the people who originally hurt us. I've seen on many occasions where, for example, the families of somebody who has been killed, when the murderer is put to death, oh my goodness, they gather outside the prison, they rejoice, they have parties, they cheer and clap that this man is being put to death. They're hateful and angry about it. That's a terrible attitude. We should grieve any time somebody in this lifetime didn't understand the purpose of their lives, that they didn't understand that they were here to feel loved and to love other people and to be happy, and that they got so lost that they got to the place where Saddam Hussein would. So how do I feel about it? Sad, very sad for him, and happy that he was killed for those whose lives were saved as a result of his execution. Does that make sense? The questioner asked, so do I feel that the execution should not be in public? Absolutely not. He should experience the consequences of his behavior. And frankly, the consequences of his behavior are none of our business. None. It shouldn't have been done in public, and there shouldn't have been photographs of him afterward. Not the kind of grisly, messy things that they did show, except perhaps maybe to, instead of photographs, to have, say, a dozen reliable witnesses there, so that the public knows that it actually took place. maybe a dozen elected judges or officials so that they witness the death to tell people he actually died. Because you don't want people thinking that there was a hoax. But to turn it into a public affair where people rejoice over his death, there's no joy in death, no matter who died. Here's somebody who said, I just watched your coaching video. When is it my business? My husband and I have a very long history of arguing. I finally realized that he is almost never capable of hearing what I'm saying, even when it is my business, even when it matters, even when I was, oops, I'm getting behind, let me make this a bigger screen. Even when it matters, even when I was feeling loving toward him and trying my best to say something in a loving way. As a result, I have learned not to speak. The result is that our rate of arguing has dramatically decreased. My husband seems just fine with this arrangement. His experience is that our relationship is better for him. What looks on the outside like peace, I experience as superficiality. I feel more empty, alone, and unsatisfied than I ever did from growing up in my family. Furthermore, I'm increasingly filled with an... I think she's going to finish this here in a minute. Let me talk about what I've read so far. The question's not done. When I say, don't speak when other people can't hear you, obviously I mean don't speak about what they can't hear. But if you're feeling that your relationship is increasingly superficial, what that means is you haven't learned yet to speak to him in a loving way. Does that make sense? For example, I have quite a number of people in my life who I can't talk to about deep, fulfilling things. I can't talk to them about real love. But I can talk to them in loving ways. I can love them. I can listen to them about the superficial things that they're interested in such a way that they love to be around me, because it's obvious to them that I care about them. And what I've discovered is, slowly, bit by bit, the more I love somebody, the more they're willing to talk about the things that matter more. You have to remember that your husband has never had an opportunity, probably ever in his life, to talk about the things that do matter to him. He probably tried as a young child and was just squashed like a bug. So this is new for him. And rather than look at this as superficial, you need to look at it as all he can handle. So no, you may not be able to talk about deep things with him, but you can talk about these deep things with other people. And you can get your source of nourishment from them with the goal that you will then come back and share that nourishment, share that love with your husband. If you do it with no expectation that you'll get anything back for yourself, he'll respond. He's still afraid. He's still wary that these changes in you aren't real. So give it time. Here's somebody who says, I'm finding it difficult to be loving in life. I see myself as an objective observer. Is it a good place because I do not get angry or upset in my many day-to-day relationship situations? I look at others in a different way. However, I am sure that my lack or limited conversations is taken as snobbish or unloving. Is there a way out of this? There's a place that most of us go through that goes like this, and I want you to let me know if this doesn't answer your question. Where most of us go from being angry and using getting protecting behaviors and essentially ruining our relationships to the place where, although we may not lash out and get angry, we move from using getting and protecting behaviors to simply not using them, to where we can just be more accepting of people. So We can go from angry to accepting, but we can't get to loving yet. And in fact, the lady that I was just talking to a moment ago is really at that place. She doesn't lash out at her husband. She doesn't take her conversations and shove them down his throat anymore. But she still doesn't feel overwhelmingly loving toward him yet either. And what I suggest to you is that at this point, that's just fine. That's a stage that you grow through before you become more actively loving. And in the meantime, people might look at you and say, oh, well, so you appear to be kind of distant and snobbish. You know, tough. That's just the stage we have to go through before we become actively loving. And it's much better to shut our mouths and appear distant than it is to go back to the old ways and open our mouths while we're angry and bring all the walls down. Don't you think? It's actually much better. So what other people think of you in the meantime while you're learning, too bad. Here's a lady who says, I was at the Austin and Phoenix conferences this year. It's my first time here. My 23-year-old daughter lives an hour away in Austin. I learned recently that she spends most nights at her 25-year-old boyfriend's house where he lives with his mom. He's a sophomore at a college there. Her stuff is stashed at her brother's house there. She was raised with both spirit-related and practical reasons for reserving sex for marriage. I find it difficult to be around her when she comes to San Antonio, where I live, which understandably is infrequently. I see her choice as evidence of my failure to raise her lovingly enough that she could wait to have sex. It's all about me, isn't it? Would you please provide me some perspective? Oh, a perspective that would be most loving. And it's true, if you had raised your daughter in a completely unconditionally loving relationship, she probably would not need to use sex as a form of imitation love. And so part of your feeling uneasy when you're around her is that feeling like you failed as a mother. Part of it also, however, is your inability to control her. As parents, we just love to control our kids. I mean, our whole adult lives, we have demonstrated that we're not able to control our spouses, our coworkers, our bosses, the weather, the government, the traffic. But from the time our kids were little, we could sure enough control them. And as they get older, we don't like giving up that power. Now, it's not intentional on our part, but you watch what a parent does when a child says, no, I'm not going to do what you say. Parents don't just then teach and love them. The parent becomes angry. Why? Because the child has just said, you can't control me. You don't have power over me. And that proves that as parents, we really enjoy using our children for power. Not very flattering, and we don't do it intentionally, but we still do it. So just look at it that way. If you just see it, you'll do it less and less. Your daughter right now, while she's using imitation love in the form of sex, needs your love more than ever. When you see her, if you treat her even the slightest bit different because you feel like she's having sex with this guy and you disapprove of her, you think she won't feel it? She feels it just radiating from you. So it is critical that you talk about this enough with other people, with other adults, especially those who understand real love, until you get to the place where you can look at your daughter and say, I accept you completely. Partly, I put you there, and you got to quit feeling bad about that too. You loved her as well as you could at the time. And now your only job is to love her as well as you can at this time. So lighten up. Lighten up on her. Quit feeling guilty yourself. Accept the fact that as you love her unconditionally now, that's all you can do, and it's the most powerful thing you can do to influence her life. Whereas if you express disapproval toward her, that'll actually make her feel more empty and afraid and more likely to pursue imitation love in the form of sex and whatever else. So Mama, just love her. That's what she needs. She's past the point of you telling her what's right and wrong. She already knows that. Now this is from the lady who we were talking to about that she was having what she thought was an increasingly superficial relationship with her husband. And she said, my response is that no amount of real love from others makes up for not getting real love from the one primary, most intimate relationship we are supposed to have in life. I think it is normal, realistic, and healthy to have expectations in a marriage and to allow ourselves to be accountable to one another for those expectations. And what I would say to you is, how's that been working? If you have the slightest expectation that your husband will love you, he will feel it as a burden and be more likely to withdraw from you or attack you or act like a victim. Expectations are the kiss of death. I strongly suggest that you read the huge sections on expectations in the book Real Love, in the book Real Love in Marriage, and in the new book that you can download from the website, which is called Real Love and Freedom for the Soul. It'll talk about the damage done by expectations in great detail. Now, is it normal to have expectations of a significant other, like a spouse? Normal, but harmful. The minute you expect something from somebody, you will destroy that relationship. The instant I walk into a room and expect anything from you, you will feel it. I call it the salesman phenomenon. Somebody comes in the room and they want to sell something to you, you can sense it. And from that moment on, you don't feel normal toward that person. They want something from you. And everything they offer you, you realize is in exchange for something that they want. Now, the love that you can get from an exclusive other, from a spouse, can be the most powerful love you'll ever experience in your life. But in the short term, if that's not available to you, you've only got two ways to go. You can either insist and pound and pressure and crowbar that person to get that love out of them, which will never work in eternity. Or you can let it go and go get the love, go get real love from people who have it, and bring it back to the relationship and share it with your partner. I'm not denying that the love from your spouse is important. It is. But if your spouse can't give it, there's no but. There's nothing after the word can't. Your husband has made it very clear that he cannot love you unconditionally. And you keep coming back with, well, but he should. The word should is pretty meaningless. It's absolutely irrelevant. The only thing you can do here is to go get love from others, bring it back to him, share it with him, and then watch the changes that will happen in your relationships. You have to let your expectations go. They will kill you, and they'll kill him. That's been proven over several trillion interactions in a row. Here's somebody that says, it seems like I'm always the one between some of my family, brother, his wife and kids, and quite a few of my friends. I'm always the one to call and stay in touch. I understand the concept of being happy versus being right, but I'm getting tired of always being the one to attempt to connect to everyone else. It tends to make me feel resentful. So what do I do, and how do I look at this situation? The instant you feel the slightest bit disappointed, frustrated, resentful, anything about making contact with other people, you just stepped past unconditional love. You just lost. Unconditional love never involves disappointment, frustration, or any expectation of return. And so instead of making the contacts with them that you feel like you ought to, the word should is just terrible. Make the contacts with them that you feel like you can make freely, because only that can be unconditional. If you attempt to make contacts past that point, you will empty yourself out and become less able to love. And as you go past the point of being unconditionally loving, the people that you're trying to love also can feel that you're not unconditionally loving them. They can feel that you're expecting something in return. So I strongly recommend to people that you never love past your ability to love freely, because nobody wins. You lose, they lose, everybody loses. So do what you want to. Don't do what they expect you to, and expect nothing in return from them. Now, in the short term, that may mean that you'll make a whole lot less contact with them. Well, okay. It's pretty clear they're not all that interested in making contact. So relax. And as you become more loving, you may make more contact with them, you may not. But it only counts when you give it freely. My 8-year-old daughter is angry all the time with my ex-partner who is terminally ill. When she's with me, she's a normal 8-year-old. And now my ex is asking me for help in disciplining our daughter. I have suggested that she read Real Love and Parenting, which we once read together. I know that my ex doesn't or can't feel loved. So how do I lovingly suggest that our daughter doesn't feel loved when she acts out in anger? Oh, easy. So you say to your ex, you say, when I lash, because when the two of you were together, you surely had many examples of this. You say, when I lashed out at you in anger, how did you feel? It'll be easy for her to answer. She felt afraid, uncomfortable, angry, blah, blah, all the things. And when I was unconditionally loving toward you, how did you feel? On those few occasions when I loved you without conditions and you really felt loved by me, did you ever act out and be angry at me? No, never. And so you just tell her the same thing is true of our daughter. When she acts out, she's not feeling loved. Now, the key here is not to blame your ex, because the instant you're blaming, her ears will stop up. So you say, and you know, I need to do a better job of loving her too. Blame it all on me. Who cares? So my goal is to learn how to better unconditionally love our daughter. And if you'd like, that's something we can work on together. Up to you. But I know that's what I'm working on. But when you use the word discipline, that's a terrible word. It's really just 2 words. Well, 3 if you include the word between them. But it's just love and teach. I'm going to work harder at learning to love and teach her simultaneously, because that's all that matters. There's no such thing really as discipline. That implies just the teaching part. Here's a man who says, my wife and I will have been married 20 years in February, next month. Just before Thanksgiving, she announced that she needed time to think about our relationship and physically moved into her office. She's been in therapy for 9 months trying to understand why she is so unhappy with her life. As a result of therapy, she discovered that our marriage was a major contributor to our unhappiness. I believe she's involved with another man as well. This situation is almost identical to a stage we overcame 14 years ago when she asked that she needed to feel loved every day. Apparently, I've not been providing this for her. Question: how should I interact with her at this stage? She has the Real Love book, but she's not read it. Is it possible for you to send an email to her to... End of question. You're going to have to finish that. The reason that your wife is unhappy is, now I'm going to make these numbers up, but it's going to be roughly accurate. The reason your wife is unhappy is 87.5% due to the fact that she was never loved by her parents and others when she was a kid, which means that 12.5% of it's your fault. Whatever. Most of it started from the time she was a child. Really. People come together in marriage. I mean, like you said, 14 years ago, she went through this also. People come together in a married relationship without enough of the one ingredient that they all need more than anything else in order to feel loved. They come together without enough. They come together without enough real love, and then they try to create a loving relationship, which is impossible. So then we try to make the relationship work by infusing enough imitation love. Well, that works for a few months, maybe even a year or more. But the imitation love wears off and then we're miserable, which is why she became miserable 14 years ago. It's why she's been miserable since, which is why she's looking around for what she can do to make her happy, and she's blaming it on you because you were stupid enough to stand up in front of everybody when you got married and say, sure, I'll make you happy. And that's what she heard you say when you said, I do. That's what everybody hears when we get married. So you didn't realize you were making that commitment, but you were. And that's what she heard. So what can you do with her? The most important thing you can do is tell the truth about yourself. So you can approach her and say, Susie, I'll make up her name, you know, all of our married life, all you've ever wanted from me was to feel unconditionally loved. And I'm just beginning to realize that I've never done that. Now, if you can think of 3 times you did that, don't point those out. We're talking about overall. So you're going to just talk about your mistakes. You're going to say, I've never known how to unconditionally love you. I didn't have it to give. In fact, only recently have I come to understand what real love even is. Now, I'm not going to change this overnight, but let me point out to you some of the terrible mistakes that I've made in our marriage. And then you go through some of your getting and protecting behaviors. I've withdrawn from you. I've become angry at you. I've acted like a victim with you, blah, blah, blah. And you use specific examples of when you've done those, and you say, every time I've done those, the message you heard from me is, I don't love you. You talk about your mistakes. Then you tell her, I'm not going to change this overnight because I'm too stupid. We all are. But I am going to commit to you that I'm going to learn how to love you. That's what I want to learn to do. So if you'd be willing, I would like to learn this with you. Now, I'm going to learn it anyway. But if you'd be willing, I'd like to get together with you periodically and share with you what I'm learning. At which point, you can share with her what you're learning out of the Real Love book. Highly recommend you get the book Real Love in Marriage, because it will really get into the details of what you've done in your marriage. And then what you do is you read in the Real Love in Marriage book, and then you get with her and you share passages out of the book with her that show what you have done wrong. You. Only you, not her. And in time, as you tell enough of the truth about you, the odds become very favorable that she will be able to tell the truth about her because you've made her feel safe. So that's what I suggest you do. And if you want more details about recommendations, you can always write me. You can write me. My email address is greg@reallove.com. Here we are. I enjoy expensive cars. New question. Is the acquisition of these always a form of imitation love, such as praise, power, etc.? It's true that some people look upon those who drive fancy cars as such. However, I do enjoy the design and performance of them. I would suggest to you that until you have more real love in your life, you won't really know. You really won't. And at this point, I can't answer the question for you. I can tell you this. I used to drive fast and fancy cars. I mean, the fastest and most expensive and coolest cars there were, and I loved it. Oh, I just loved driving. I enjoyed like you said, I enjoyed the design and performance and the power and the whole deal. And I can tell you that the more unconditional love you feel in your life, which is so cool, the more you realize that compared to that, driving fast cars becomes like crumbs of stale bread compared to chocolate cake. Your perspective just changes. I am not going to tell you you're using it for imitation love. You'll figure that out. The more loved you feel, you're going to see the relative comparison. But as I have become more loved and as I have felt more loving, I don't care what I'm in anymore. Now I drive a plain old, boring family car, and we drive the speed limit everywhere we go. And I look back at those old cars, the cars that I used to drive, and just sort of smile and go, yeah, it was fun. I used to ride motorcycles very fast. I enjoyed that. And now I just don't care. So it really changes your perspective. And that wasn't that many years ago. So you'll figure it out the more loved you feel. Here's somebody who said, at one point I promised to put the Real Love wedding vows on the website, and I failed. So I need to do that. I'll ask Mike to come up with a good place to put it. But I'll get them up there. Oh, we'll put them up as a blog. That's what we'll do. We'll put them up as the next blog. Thank you. Blog wedding vows. So thank you for reminding me for my transgression of inactivity. And I will, because I already got them written, and we'll put them up. And so look for them on the blog sometime in the next few days. Our blog master is presently out of pocket and will be back on the 4th. These have been very, very good, insightful, thought-provoking questions, by the way. And if you have more, we have 12 more minutes to answer them. These have been just wonderful. Somebody asked if these questions, if the chat was going to be archived. And we will not archive them. Somebody actually preferred that they not be, and we will not have them archived. I save them because I sometimes use the questions to create coaching videos out of. Just kind of reminds me of good questions, but we won't have them up there so that your friends and relatives won't go up there and go, ah, she was talking about me. And when I create a coaching video out of them, I always change the names. And I always change the details too. I mean, if you have one 18-year-old daughter, I'll probably make it a 15-year-old son. Nobody will recognize your story. My mistake. I just told you that the chat would not be archived. What I mean is that the typed text will not be archived. Now, the last, we're going to take this as our last question. I was talking to the man whose wife had moved into the office, and I was suggesting that he read the Real Love book, that he read the marriage book. And I also suggest if you didn't get all the answer to this, you come back to the website and see the archived video chat, because the entire answer is there. He was asking, could I send her an email message asking her to read the book? No. And the reason is that she would take it as being controlled. She would take it as being criticized. But as you read the book, and as you read Real Love and Marriage, if you'll do what I said, and that is go to her and tell her about your mistakes. If you didn't hear my whole answer, come back and see the archived response that I gave you. Then you really need to go to her and describe your mistakes. And as you describe those and open yourself up to her, she'll be way more likely to read the book than if I sent her an email. I mean, 100 times more likely. Now, here's another person who added on to their question. That was the question about contacting people. He was saying that he contacts the people in his family, and he's the only person who does. And finally was getting resentful, and I was saying, well, then just contact them when you don't feel resentful. Only love people when you feel able. And a continuation of the question was this. So should I just not contact them at all until I feel loving enough to make contact? Or shall I make a request that they contact me more? No. Don't ever say to people who are not contacting you, will you contact me more? I want everybody who's out there, think of the many times when people have not written you letters or not made phone calls, and you've said, well, gee, I wish I could hear from you more. Name a single time when they did it. They don't. People do not respond to that. People are telling you with their behavior exactly how often they want to contact you. No kidding. If you want to find out how often a family member wants to write to you, look at their behavior. If they're not writing, what are they telling you? I don't want to write you. Got the message? Or I don't want to call you. They're already answering your question. So you're only in charge of what you want to do, period. So if for the time being you don't want to contact them at all until you feel more loving, great. And then if they call you and they say, well, how come you haven't been writing? Or they call you and say, you haven't been calling. Do not give in to the impulse to say, well, you haven't been calling either. You always talk about yourself, not them. And so you say, you know, I just haven't. You don't need a reason. You do not have to justify yourself. So, very cool. It's been really lovely having you all here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come back next Tuesday. We're getting more and more people coming to the chat. Come, especially I suggest that you come prepared with questions that you get during the week. During the week, everybody has little events that happen that are frustrating, annoying, bring up fears, cause getting and protecting behaviors. As I talk to people in counseling, invariably people will say, well, I'm so frustrated. I'm so frustrated with my child or my husband. And I say, well, so give me an example. Well, I can't think of one. You know, until you have an example, it's almost impossible to talk about how you could do it differently. So when you come next time, bring your examples with you. Write them down during the week. And you'll just love the experience when you bring up your own. So, as always, it's always about real love. And we love you. Good night.